Well, good morning. I'm Chicken Johnny. We're going to talk today a little bit about organic versus non-organic farming. And actually, really what I'm going to do is I'm going to share 4 pet peeves that I have about people who are organic gardeners and doing organic programs on YouTube. Now, none of this should be taken personally. I'm not really complaining about anything. I just find that when people sometimes state their opinions, they state things a little bit stronger than that. And I'm sure I do that as well. Sometimes we say something that we mean to be informative, and we're really saying something either untrue, something that we believe to be true but it's not true, or we say something that offends somebody else. We don't mean to, but it makes it seem offensive. So I want to go over 4 things that bother me about not organic farming, but about the hype that goes with organic farming. So we're going to get started with that in just a minute. I'm Chicken Johnny. If you're watching this content and you want to see more of it, hit the subscribe button, hit that little thumbs up button. I really get a kick out of seeing the high numbers on the thumbs up button, and same with subscribing. And then if you could leave a little comment down in the comment section, just tell me either what you think about the video, what you thought about the topic, how nice my hair is on the program. I've really worked hard to make my hair look nice today. Anything in the comments would be fantastic. Well, let's get into it. 4 things I don't like about organic gardeners' video posts. Let's put it that way. Pet peeve number 1. Organic food tastes better. Well, maybe. Not all organic food tastes better. You go to the grocery store, for example, and you buy an organic apple and you buy a non-organic apple. You eat both of them. There's a lot of other things that go into it. Was that apple fresh? Because chances are the organic one and the non-organic one were not picked at the same time, so one of them might be fresher than the other. Was that apple the same type of apple? Because that's a big deal. You know, certain apples, we found the Fuji apples are really sweet. I don't care for them. I like a Granny Smith. It's got a little tartness, but I like the crispness of a Jonathan. In fact, my favorite apple, and we've got 3 of these in our yard, my favorite is the Golden Jonathan apple. And this year I'm going to try to prune my trees back so that we'll get apples. We haven't really had much of an apple harvest in the last couple of years. Now, I want you to understand something. I'm not an organic farmer, but I use very few inorganic inputs. When I hear somebody say that organic food just tastes better, well, what I'd like to do is challenge them. Go to the grocery store and buy any organic tomato you want to, and bring it out to my house when tomatoes are in season, and I'll pick a tomato off the vine of my non-organic plants, and you tell me which one tastes better. And I will guarantee you, unless you lie to me about it, you're going to say that my fresh home garden tomato, because even though I do sell my produce, I still do everything like a home gardener. You tell me that that tomato isn't 10 times better than the one you bought in the grocery store, the organic one you bought in the grocery store. Because the fact of the matter is, when it gets to the level of the fruit, organic phosphorus is going to taste the same as inorganic phosphorus. Fact is, there's no such thing as inorganic nitrogen or inorganic phosphorus or inorganic potassium. And there's certainly nothing inorganic about copper or about any of the other elements. The main difference between an organic and a non-organic NPK fertilizer is where it came from. And there are some environmental reasons why it'd be a great idea for you to be organic, especially in a small garden. But it's not going to make your food taste better. What makes your food taste better is that you've done a good job of being sure that it's got all the elements it needs, whether they're organic or from an organic source or from an inorganic source. So, organic, inorganic, it's not going to affect the taste. The way that that fruit was taken care of in the process, if it was grown in a hoop house, if it was grown in a situation where it really wasn't getting any of the micronutrients, well, that might have a difference in the flavor. But organic, non-organic isn't going to make the difference. So gripe number 2, organic food is more nutritious. Well, show me the science on that. Show me where they've done any studies where organic food has had higher nutrient content, nutrient values, than inorganic food. Now you can find some. If you look hard enough, you'll find 3 or 4 studies. The problem is that's not how science works. The way science works is that a study has to be repeatable, it has to be demonstrative, and backed up by other similar studies. If you've got one outlier in a study that says that organic bananas have higher levels of potassium than non-organic bananas, but you've also got 9 or 10 studies that say, no, the organic bananas are just the same, well, then you've got to take that one outlier and eliminate it. The exception doesn't make the rule. But the other thing about that is plants will not put more nutrient into their fruits because that nutrient's available. Now, if the nutrient isn't available, it's not going to be in the fruit. But if you make those nutrients available, they'll be in the fruits. The nutritional quality of the food will be high. But it will only reach a certain level unless you start genetically modifying it. But here's the other thing. The nutrient quality of non-organic food and of organic food is the same. Now, there are advantages to organic farming, but it's not because it makes the plant more nutritious. Now, it's true that rotation of crops, the density of the crops, the amount of space allowed to the crop, the amount of water put on the crop, and it does have to have available minerals, that's going to make a difference in the nutritional quality, but not organic versus non-organic. I think crop diversity is what's really important there, and biodiversity, which may be a point for the organic, but not necessarily. So my number 3 is that organic farming is better for the environment, period. Now, this one you have to be careful with because there are things about organic gardening that make it better for the environment. And I think as time goes by, those things will increasingly play a role. But the other side of that is that conventional farming is not nearly as bad for the environment as it used to be. We're making changes, particularly in how we sequester nitrogen into fertilizer. We use a lot less fossil fuel today than we used to, and the off-gassing of that fossil fuel, what we don't use in the creation of ammonium nitrate, what we don't use of the natural gas is actually being used it actually ends up being carbon dioxide is what's left. And it's actually being pumped into greenhouses to feed plants carbon dioxide, which makes them grow a lot better. And so maybe someday we can talk about carbon dioxide in plants. But there are problems, for example, with mining of phosphorus and mining of potassium, and these things are not renewables, so there's some issues there, and we have to address them. But right now, with our present technology, organic gardening is not better for the environment, especially when we look at some of the row crops that we grow. So around me, I primarily have corn, soybean, and alfalfa hay. Now, all I can say is that you don't get 400 bushels an acre of field corn using organic methods. In fact, I've heard that it's as low as 170 to 180 bushels an acre is what the organic farmers are getting here in the Midwest. So, my dad used to talk about 100 bushel an acre corn. So the processes, both in organic and inorganic, have really gone up. We're doing a much better job of crop densities and getting higher and better crop densities. But the non-organic row crops still are benefiting by no-till. They're benefiting by strip tillage, so they're not using nearly as much fossil fuel anymore to produce the bushels of product, bushels of corn that they're creating. And because of the changes in the nitrogen levels, or the way that we create nitrogen, we have a much smaller carbon footprint in the inorganic farming than we used to. But here's the big one. Now, I just mentioned field corn, and the crop yields 400 an acre. 400 acres, pretty doggone good. And I don't think you get that without really pushing your crops. I don't think anybody got that around here last year, because we had a drought in August and the corn died early, and fortunately for my neighbors, they'd planted a lot of soybean, and so it didn't have quite as big an impact as had it been corn. But if you're only getting 160 to 180 bushels compared to 400 bushels, that means that you would need to double or more than double the amount of land that you use. But the reality is, most studies have shown that organic farming, right across the boards, organic farming yields at about 75% of what non-organic farming yields. Now, again, we're not talking about a garden, we're not even talking about my little space. We're talking about a serious commercial gardener who's planting a field. He's going to get a much larger yield, 25% greater yield than if he was organic. Now, does it really make that big of a difference in a small garden? Our environmental impact is almost zero in the small garden. If you're putting on nitrogen at a rate of about 100 pounds an acre, which is about what we do, we don't spread nitrogen over the whole field. I spread nitrogen, I side dress with nitrogen. We just strip right along the side. We'll put a strip of nitrogen, and that nitrogen will be right where the mycorrhizae need it to get it to the plant. Actually, the phosphorus and the potassium, primarily the phosphorus will be there. The nitrogen will be available to the plant almost immediately. Now, these are water-soluble fertilizers. And in order to further reduce our carbon footprint, one of the things you can do with commercial fertilizer is you can get slow release. And usually it comes in a packaging like 50% of the available nitrogen will be available immediately or within hours of being wetted down, of being watered. And the other half will be available down the road. And they're different. I'm not going to go into the amount of time. I like to see about a 4-week interval between the first release and the second release. That would save me from having to refertilize. I don't use time-release fertilizer. I'm not that far along yet. But when you fertilize with organic fertilizers, they have to be put on a lot earlier, and it takes a lot longer for them to release. So if you're putting on the same, and you'd have to cover the entire field. So as in terms of nitrogen runoff, that's the other environmental impact, is that the nitrogen that doesn't get consumed by the plant because it dissolves into the liquids, into the waters, it could run off into the rivers surrounding. Now, I don't have to worry too much about that. My field is not tiled, so I'm not pumping the water from my field into any kind of a reservoir. I do have a small swale that I built that collects water. But I don't have to worry about the nitrogen runoff. And the fourth thing is kind of a pet peeve of mine for a long time. I'll be at our farm stand selling vegetables, and somebody's going to come up, and this happens every summer at least 3 or 4 times. Somebody will come up to the stand. Sometimes they don't even get out of their car. They roll down the window. They say, "Are you organic?" And my response is, "We don't use any insecticides, non-organic insecticides on our crops, but we are not certified organic." And I have to say that because when you ask me, "Are you organic?" if I were to say something like, "Well, we're sort of organic," it'd be very deceiving because I'm not sort of organic. I don't have a certificate. I am not organically certified. I haven't been certified by peer reviews. Now, I get in a lot of trouble for indicating that I'm sort of organic, or that, well, I'm organic except for, because I'm organic except for the fact that I'm not organic. I haven't been certified. And that's all organic cares about, really. So my pet peeve is that person will sometimes just say, "Oh, I only eat organic," and drive away. Or they'll take a big sip off of their cup of McDonald's coffee and say, "Well, I really only eat organic. It's so much better for you," and then drive away. I had a lady come to the stand. She looked at my fruits and vegetables. She was, probably a full person and a half overweight. Now, I'm overweight, and I'm not criticizing her for being overweight. And I'm not even pointing that out as being really the issue. But for her to look at me with her cup of McDonald's coffee in her hand and say, "I only eat organic, it's so much healthier for you," it was more than I could take. So I looked at her and I said, "Is that decaffeinated coffee?" And I think that she thought that it was a moral superior thing to be drinking decaffeinated coffee, and she proudly said, "Oh yes, I only drink decaf." And I said, "Well, that's interesting. Do you know how they take the caffeine out of the coffee beans?" "No." I said, "Well, you should Google that. You should look up how caffeine is removed from coffee beans. They soak the beans in a known carcinogenic. They then rinse them 3 times. Now that process may have changed over time, but that's how they did it 15 years ago. I looked it up. The point is this. What's gotten me into the health problems that I'm in is not because I ate fruits and vegetables out of my garden. It's because I got into the habit of buying my breakfast at McDonald's. I didn't do that for very long, but prior to that I was buying breakfast at Dunkin' Donuts. And then sometimes I'd stop at a family restaurant and go in and I'd have breakfast. And at lunch I got into the habit of eating a lot, and I mean a lot, of Popeye's chicken. Now somebody might say, well, chicken's good for you. Not Popeye's chicken. The point is that anytime you eat anything that's been processed, it's so bad for you. The preservatives that they use in processed food, the chemicals that they add to enhance the flavors. Let's face it, we've all looked at the McDonald's hamburger, all beef, 100% beef patty that's on that burger. We've all looked at it and said, 100% pure beef, took us. We know there's other things in there. We know that that can't be the same beef that we get off of that grass-fed cattle. All right. I guess really what I'm saying is, if you're only going to eat organic vegetables, you can't eat Captain Crunch for breakfast. If you're only going to eat organic vegetables, you can't drink Powerade. You can't drink things that are so far from organic that they don't have anything that wasn't synthesized inside of them. Burger King's come out with a meatless hamburger. It's not a veggie burger. Listen, what I'm trying to do in this video is not really to praise non-organic farming. I just want you to think about it. I want you to think about a couple of ideas. Right now, the Organic Farming Association spends millions, maybe even more, worldwide, millions of dollars pushing organic food, promoting organic food and organic farming. And the non-organic farmers, they spend just as much, if not more money, pushing and pushing. The propaganda on both sides is so thick you could eat it with a spoon, but be careful. It's not organic. It's pure bull. In the last 20 years of my life, I've seen agriculture change in ways that are difficult to describe. The amount of diesel that we use today compared to the amount of diesel that we used 20 years ago, it staggers the imagination. And I'm not saying we use more. I'm saying we use less. We use less because the tractors run better. We use less because of the techniques that we use. We're not dragging heavy 16-bottom plows through the field. We're not making multiple cultivation passes on 1,000 acres of cornfield. We're using cover crops. We're planting cover crops in the fall of the year after the soybean or the corn has been removed. Now, we don't do a lot of that in the Midwest. We don't have a long enough season, but you get down into southern Illinois, get out into some of these other places, actually get out west, and they use a lot of cover crop to fix nitrogen into the soil, to cut down the amount of fertilizer we have to add in. In the fall of every year, I cover my garden with organic matter. It's organic matter that I get from my neighbor. It's gone through his cows, and it's good, rich fertilizer. Now, I don't know how much nitrogen, how much phosphorus, how much potassium. A lot of that has to do with the horse's diet. So I have to go by what is typical, kind of gauge that way. And I don't put even commercial fertilizer, I don't put it on every single crop. I put it on greens, things like broccoli and cabbage, they're heavy feeders. Onions, they get fed, and the garlic as well. They get a lot of nitrogen in the beginning, and then from the midpoint on, from the time they finish or begun bulbing on, they get a lot of sulfur, potassium, and phosphorus. Some of it's organic, but most of what I put in mid-year is not organic. And the reason is I can limit the amount I put out. If I do organic, I've got to put tons of it out to cover my fields. And it's hard for me to get enough organic matter to cover my fields. Could you imagine if commercial farmers, my neighbors who are farming 6,000 acres of corn and soybean, plus another, I don't know how many acres of alfalfa and timothy grass, if they were going to have to use organic inputs only, where are they going to come from? We're already using all of the organic inputs. Listen, my neighbor down the other way, he's a cattle farmer. He cleans that manure up and puts it into a compost pond, and then that pond gets stirred periodically. We can tell it's about once a month. You can really smell it when it does. And then he pumps that manure into his truck and he goes out and spreads it on his fields. It's not compost tea, it's more like a compost pudding. But they spread that out. They buy malorganite, which is well composted human sewage, human manure, and they spread that on the fields. There just isn't enough organic material to cover all of those farms. No, what we need is a blending. And I guess if there's a fifth pet peeve, my fifth pet peeve is there are a bunch of people out there who, if you even suggest that you use some non-organic product, they throw a tantrum. They might be eating a can of Pringles when they do it, but they get upset with you. How dare you put chemicals on our food? Well, let's face it. If you like a bag of chips, if you drink a soda, if you have dry dairy creamer in your coffee, don't talk to me about organic farming and organic gardening. Instead, what we should be doing is we should be encouraging people to garden with the most successful methods they can. And that's a combination of organic and non-organic inputs. Now, eventually, you can back down on your non-organic inputs, especially in a home garden, because you won't have a problem getting plenty of cow manure or horse manure or sheep manure. That's one of my favorites until you have to shovel it out of the barn. But you should have no problem getting enough inputs to take care of your field. One year we actually went out and cleaned the goose poop around a pond. And we got paid to clean that goose poop up. And then we brought that home in truckloads, and we ended up spreading that on the field. And as far as I can tell, it was a pretty good fertilizer. Organic or non-organic, the plants really can't tell the difference as long as you've given them a full, balanced, or I should say a complete, because that's the term, a complete, balanced diet. And as far as the environment, I think there's coming a day when organic farming is going to be decidedly better for our environment. But that day is not today. Today, we need to feed, I think it's like 9 billion people. There just ain't that much horse crap in the world. So we need to be good stewards of the horse crap. Oh, something else interesting. Milorganite, which is human sewage, is not permitted in organic farming. So the non-organic farmers use tons, and I mean tons and tons and tons of it. Now this stuff has been composted for 3 years professionally in professionally monitored and built compost machines where the compost is being turned on a regular basis, the temperatures are being maintained and being checked repeatedly throughout the process. It's called Milorganite. You can buy it at the Home Depot. But if you put it on your field, you're not organic. A couple of more quick ones, and then I'm going to go to editing this video, and we'll see if anybody's interested in watching it. But here's a couple of things that I find funny when I watch organic farmers. Organic farmers who are growing in rubber tires. I would not grow a single thing in a rubber tire, and let me tell you why. Rubber tires are petroleum-based, heavily petroleum-based, and in the sun, they leach out those petroleum oils. That's why tires get weather checked, because the oil is being sucked out of the tire. Don't ever plant food in a rubber tire. It's not a good idea. It's relatively unsafe. Relatively. I don't think it'll kill you, but planting into galvanized buckets. Now, if you know that that's a galvanized bucket that was made in the last 5 years, you're probably fine. But the galvanizing process where the zinc was glued, that's what the term galvanized actually means, adhered. Up until 5 years ago, there was lead used in the process of galvanization. I know this because as someone who's made his living making and installing galvanized ductwork, we were put on notice that, hey, lead poisoning, it's a big deal. Don't grow your food in zinc buckets. In fact, if you're hauling water for your chickens and so forth, I'd go get a rubber bucket. I wouldn't transport anything in a galvanized bucket. Dry food would be fine because it's not gonna mix with the galvanized and the lead. And as I say, if the bucket was made in the last 5 or so years, it may be just fine. Another one. Don't tell me about your organic farming while you're smoking a cigarette. Now, I'm not aiming that at anybody personally, and I'm not saying you shouldn't smoke cigarettes. But let's not be hypocrites about organic versus non-organic. And if you're worried about the environmental impacts, I know some of the people watching this are off-grid or mostly off-grid. You can complain to me about the environmental impacts. But if you're driving around in a car and you're living in a house that has LP or natural gas for heat or uses electric heat, or if you're burning logs in a fireplace and you're telling me that the creation of nitrogen has big carbon impact, let's understand something. We're talking about the creation of food. If we have to put a little bit of a carbon footprint out there to create the food, that's okay. Because you know who really is going to rely on non-organic farming? Not the rich people. They can afford it. It's the poor people. It's the people who are starving to death around this country. One of the next videos that I'm going to put together is on genetically modified fruits and vegetables. I encourage you to watch it. It might make you rethink your gardening philosophy on GMOs. I'm Chicken Johnny. Hey, I've enjoyed chatting with you. I hope you've enjoyed listening. I'm going to be live Tuesday night, probably, I think it's 8 o'clock Central Time. But look for the notifications. If you don't get the notifications, ring the bell and you'll be notified. Ring the bell, hit subscribe, thumbs up, leave a comment. I'm Chicken Johnny. Emitzer Shem. Eat your vegetables.